Okay, good morning, everyone. Bonjour, and welcome to this morning's panel on Indigiqueer literature today. I'm Rachel McCrum, and I'm delighted and honoured to be here this morning with Billy Ray Belcourt, Shayne Michael, and Joshua Whitehead. You can give them a round of applause. We're all up early. We'll give it a bit of a warm-up. This activity is offered by Kwahiatonhk and the Maison de la littérature as part of the 13th First Nations Bookfair, a TELUS presentation in collaboration with the CN, Innergex Renewable Energy, Hydro-Québec, the Caisse Desjardins de Wendake, OHWIHSTA, and OKT Law. Produced by Kwahiatonhk, the 2024 edition is made possible thanks to the financial support of the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of Canada, the Government of Quebec, the SODEC, the City of Quebec, and Wendake. I have to say that every time. I'm going to very quickly and briefly introduce our three speakers, and then we'll get into the meat of it. I feel like a lot of you may know their work, and may know them already, but it doesn't hurt to recap. So Billy Ray Belcourt is a writer and academic from the Driftpile Cree Nation. He's an associate professor in the School of Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia, and as a Rhodes Scholar, went to the colonizers' land to obtain his master's in women's studies to highlight the role of Indigenous women in social resistance movement. I love that in a bio, by the way. Since publishing his debut poetry collection in 2018, This Wound is a World, he has kept up a ferocious rate of publishing, I have to say. I was sort of stacking the books higher with Indian Coping Mechanism Notes from a Field in 2019, a minor chorus in 2020, A History of My Brief Body in 2022, and most recently, Coexistence in 2024. Shayne Michael, originally from New Brunswick, Shayne Michael is Wolastoqiyik and Acadian. He's a member of the Madawaska Maliseet First Nation. His writing comes later in his creative journey, which started in theatre and dance. He has said that his poetry is born of dance and his writing anchored in the body. His first collection, Fif et Sauvage, was published in 2020 and won the Indigenous Voices Prize for poetry published in French. In 2023, he published Nos Racines, Our Roots. Joshua Whitehead. Joshua Whitehead is a two-spirit Oji Nehia? Nahiao. Thank you, sorry, I should have asked you before. Member of the Peguis First Nation Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba. He is a poet, novelist, and scholar. His first poetry collection, Full Metal Indigiqueer 2017, is a viral song, is a round dance, is a jingle dress, is medicine. His novel, Johnny Appleseed 2018, was shortlisted for the Governor-General's Literary Award and won the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Fiction and the George Bonet, do you know I kept pronouncing that the Gorgeous Bonet Award for Fiction? The Gorgeous Bonet Award for Fiction. His 2022 essay, Making Love with the Land, has been published in a French version with Mémoire d'Encrier. Your three panelists, warm your hands. So I'm gonna actually start with last night with the show. Hands up if you were there in La Méduse. Yes, lots of people. They've all seen you. They're fans already. And the show was called. Please pronounce it for me, Shayne, properly.
Monoquinol.
Monoqual. I was going for monoqual, which means rainbow. So talk to me a bit about the show. How did you, as curator, how did you weave the texts together? What was your creative decisions in bringing existing texts, but very carefully placed?
Yes, well, so I told Louis Carl, I was like, we don't have anything Indigiqueer yet, like, to see here, especially in the Francophone side. I mean, I started to write a book, and then there's a lot of new voices that are participating. But there's a lot of really good authors, like Joshua Whitehead, Billy Ray Belcourt, and we don't have the chance to have them here. So it's a great way to, because we see a lot of translation, but it's also good to hear the original text. So I really wanted to bring all those different voices, because sometimes we get inspired by those people as well. So I feel like it's important to build upon that. And there was something hard by doing like poetry and then a novel, so it's really different to put that in a show. But I really wanted to stay like as a fragment or different moments, like the rainbows. When you spot them, like you see that, and then another rainbow, and so that's how I pictured the idea of the show. And since we're all colorful, we have different ways of communicating. The body has so many stories to tell. So I really want to express that to all those different directions. So and I really wanted to keep it human as well, so to make more like just to enjoy the different images that we get to see from each person, and just to live a moment. So yeah.
It was gorgeous, and I'll come back to the dance element of it because that was quite something. In terms of the text, so it feels like there's Indigiqueer. It's 20 years apparently since Indigiqueer has been out there as a term, the language, if not the reality, obviously. But there's been this explosion in the last few years. So Joshua, there's 2017 with Full Metal Indigiqueer, and then a lot of these texts have really come out in the last few years. So how much are you responding to each other's work? How are you influenced by each other? Are the work intertwined, or it feels like there's conversations in this between you? Is that fair? Throwing that over.
I think so. Billy Ray and I met, so I was just about to join my PhD at the University of Calgary, and had flown into Alberta from Manitoba with my previous supervisor, Jenny Haejun Wills, who's an amazing Korean-Canadian writer as well. And we went there was a conference at the U of A, University of Alberta. I think it was TP Confessions, which is a very fun, raunchy show, I will say, in its SparkNotes version. When I was first introduced to Billy Ray Belcourt.
I think it was 2015.
Was it 2015?
At a critical race studies conference.
Oh, was okay.
It was in Edmonton, though.
It was, okay, yeah, you're right.
I love that it's Critical Race Studies Conference, TP Confessions.
Similar, audiences.
In the vein. Yeah, and I was finishing Full Metal, and Billy was presenting his work at the time as well. And I feel like, the work has kind of spoken to one another. I mean, we don't have the same experience, obviously. Albertan, Northern Alberta, Southern Manitoba, myself being OG Cree, but I'm pretty, more versed in my Cree epistemologies than I am my niche. Both millennials, queer folk. So I feel like the work itself is already within a small arena, and even smaller within a queer Indigenous Cree arena. And I found your work incredibly inspiring. It's uplifted me when I need to be uplifted. And there's always an uncanny feeling, you undoubtedly and unconsciously know something that's wrong or joyful or painful or beautiful or heartbreaking, and you just don't know how to narrate it until a writer comes along and puts those exact words that you didn't know how to maybe bring into the world. And I feel Billy Ray Belcourt has done that continuously for me. So it's always just kind of been a response to maybe a lot of the affective or emotional responses I have had as a writer. And then just kind of for me, building around, to kind of maybe use some of your title, building around the chorus as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that we published our first books the same year, I think, 2017. And so by virtue of that, we were automatically put in the conversation. But as Josh has already accounted, we've been in the similar orbits. We were in similar orbits prior to that. I think, I just taught some of Josh's work in my class last week, my Indigenous writing seminar. And I was telling my students, because we looked at an excerpt of Johnny Appleseed, and I was like, I think we're reading what will be a classic of Indigiqueer literature. So that's something that I feel a lot of appreciation for, and also proud of that we're working at the same time. And I feel like we didn't so there was people prior to us, queer Indigenous writers prior to us, like Gregory Schofield, for example, Christos, working primarily in poetry, who sort of laid the foundation, I think, for us to sort of build out on. And it feels important to be part of what now seems to be a critical mass of queer, Indigenous, and trans, Indigenous, and Two-Spirit writers, where we're really, I mean, I don't remember who first articulated this, but it feels like we're like creating this other kind of canon.
Yes, I think so. I mean, the critical mass is a really good way to describe it. And Shayne, for you then, in that Billy Ray and Joshua had published a bit earlier than Fifan Sauvage, were you aware of their work? Had that influenced your decision to publish and the language that you used to publish it?
I was not even, like, when I first wrote, because I started writing in 2017, but I've never read, like, I didn't like reading before that. So I was just like, I'm going to write every single day. I was just starting to just write, you know, because I discovered like an artist that was singing here in Quebec. And I was like, oh, wow, Indigenous artists exist. And that's what inspired me to like focus on my culture first. So I wrote Fifi Sauvage slowly until it was published in 2020. And it's really afterwards that I started to read more Indigiqueer literature. That's when I discovered Johnny Appleseed. And that's what it pushed me to learn more about that area of the field. I was like, and there was like similarities. I was like, oh, there's things that, you know, seems like, but it's in French, but it's echoes with what was written already. And I feel like that's inspiring, and it's helping me a lot. And yeah, so that's how the progress happened. But it's really good to see that there's much more that happened, and it's like Christmas. It's like so many books to read, so many more. So I'm still doing this, and I feel like I'm more reading those, like that type of literature. I'm not reading like anything like novels about cats, or I'm just reading specific. I feel like that's what I need to.
It's an immersion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Looking across, I sort of want to jump slightly, look across different art forms, so Indigiqueer representation, not just in literature. I'm gonna start with the dance last night for you, Shayne, because for those who were there was a beautiful, I can't believe that was improvised. The control and the expression was stunning. And so how does dance and body work play into that for you as well? And is there a relation between that and your literature, your writing?
Yeah, well, I feel like I was someone who's like, when I still say that, I was an introvert, I don't talk a lot, and I feel like dance was a way for me to express something that I could not say in words. So I feel like whenever I wanted to, like even for writing, I was like just dancing in my bedroom or in the living room, and I was trying to speak at the same time, trying to see if the brain can fit with the body, because sometimes we're not sure how to express something. But there was always a way for me. I was always fascinated by like just understanding the body language as well, like for not just for myself, but for other people. Because I know a lot of people, well, I don't know my Indigenous language, but even if you don't understand it, you can still understand the body language, what they're saying. There's something very important about that. And I feel like it has a voice, it has history. So I feel like that's how I use dance as a motor to more explore the language as well. So I like to improvise a lot. I feel I go with the energy around me, how the spirits are around as well. So it's more like a very spiritual side too of me that I like to use dance. And yeah, so it brings just random words. I'm not someone who talks a lot, like long sentences, but I'm still working on that actually to be able to maybe write a novel or something more. But I'm like more like a little pieces of words out there yet. So yeah. It's really fulfillment. It's really satisfying to see that the body can speak as well, and it's like two entities basically.
Oh, I love that. And because I'm just thinking, Billy Ray, I was struck in your writing and last night as well. The word body comes up over and over again, like you're talking about body, and you know, there's a physicality in both your writing, but body is like there a lot. So do you ever incorporate movement or body, like physicality into it?
No, I mean, I think I'm thinking about the body at the intersection of like embodiment, so the material reality of it, and also the like conceptual possibilities of it. So it's for me less about when I'm writing, especially like how I'm inhabiting space, and more about like how I can write about the body that opens up, you know, ideas for me about how to, you know, live in the world, the work of writing desire, that requires me to like relinquish some of my, I've been calling it like, you can't hold too much of a romance with the present. That's sort of one of my, I guess, craft presuppositions. But I do think that as a queer writer, I'm a part of a long lineage of writers who thinking about the body, both as a site of limitation and of possibility. I think, I think that was Judith Butler's phrase, that, you know, the body is a site of constitution and also like intense constraint. And we build our lives in between those two things. And so that's what I'm thinking about.
In coexistence, which is fabulous, it's all fabulous, young adults, the narrator is a visual artist and his partner Tom is a writer, which was interesting. And I'm going to explain this a bit. So the narrator comes across a passage that his partner Tom has written that's very sexy and very beautiful, and reacts to it. And then after says, I imagine painting the scene he describes, but the desire isn't genuine. An image would be purely pornographic, but something in Tom's writing elevates it to a more poetic dimension. It isn't just that in Tom's work we are two young men in the world and in love, but the world and love are thrumming inside us. And that idea that there was something then with the visual representation, I'm sort of asking you to even extrapolate that even more. But then, you know, I'm thinking of like Indigiqueer, because it's a Kent Monkman image on the front of it, you know, and Kent Monkman's using queerness and obviously visual imagery, and it's not pornographic, but it's erotic / complicated. And so we're not going to get into a Kent Monkman critique on this. I don't even have the words. But so how does then visual art and also, Joshua, I mean, do you play with different genres as well, or is it straight writing? And performance for you, because your performance is so bodied. Yeah. Sorry, there's about 8 questions in that. I'm just going to throw it over.
No, I don't really have any other creative outlet, I think.
I mean, last night we were like, I think our only talents are writing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I mean, I have a hard time keeping my hands very still when I'm speaking.
Very expressive hands.
And I also, like, in Winnipeg, if folks have visited, there is this beautiful the Exchange District is this really old part of Winnipeg, right in the downtown central core. And then there's a street, Osborne, and then, parallel to it is Corydon, which is more like, I guess, like they call it Little Italy, basically, of Winnipeg. If we can have a little Italy in Winnipeg. But Osborne is this like amazing, beautiful street. It starts to border like St. Boniface as well, right along the Forks, which is just like it's an old epistemological node, I would say, for anyone from Treaty 1. And so I was kind of born into my tutelage, I guess, as a writer was, writing poems for pennies, basically, doing a lot of word on the street performances, as well as collaborative work with a lot of Winnipeg's kind of creative hub, again, on Osborne, which were like dancers, rappers, but also visual artists, jazz musicians. So a lot of I would say my tutelage was collaborative work across different forms of creative expression, I suppose I would say. But I'm also very drawn to like ekphrasis, or like responding to artwork through writing. So that was, kind of some of my earliest writing methods, I would say, as a writer, that I still deploy to this day. Like you said, there's Kent Monkman on the cover of Full Metal. There's also another Kent Monkman cover on my anthology that I edited, Love After the End. I was just in Halifax and saw another Kent Monkman in person, which is always a pleasure of mine because they are so large. And I feel this like beautiful kinship with Monkman because Kent Monkman is from Fisher River, which is right like minutes away. You can walk literally from my reservation to his, as a Cree, queer, two-spirit painter / writer as well, with his 2 memoirs that came out simultaneously. But with Monkman and with writing, with Indigenous writing, and something I teach my students is like, yes, you can read it like word for word and understand it. But there's like there's a language within it that is bound to Indigenous epistemologies or worldviews. So, for example, like in a Monkman painting, like for example, like with the daddies, when he's with the Fathers of Confederation on a HBC blanket, wearing Louboutins, and dressed as provocatively as he wants to, or something like The Scream, which is, again, an intertextual reference to Edward Munch, right? Or this one I saw, or in our literatures, like to fully understand a novel or a book of poetry or an essay by an Indigenous writer requires a lot of, I would say, work and being a guest and guesting, and like meeting the author on the page from the reader. And I have to do that as a guest to other Indigenous literatures, because there are epistemological codes and values and worldviews and knowledges and, I would say, embodied forms of being that are like, not subtext, I guess, really, that one requires to fully appreciate, love, and be seen and held by a book, rather than just the straightforward plot. Which, for me, right at this point, like I'm starting to care less about novels with plot, plotless novels, and more in lieu of novels or works that are like meeting epistemological need. That's, for me, where I am at this point in my life.
Beautifully expressed. Yeah. So what's interesting as well then is you're both in academia at this point, and I'm curious, and you've both written about being in academia and the tensions that lie within that, and the language tensions that lie, and epistemological tensions that lie within that as well. So what does academia bring to the conversation? I mean, there's now UBC has Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer studies as an interdisciplinary field grounded in the languages, cultures, histories, geographies, identities, and contemporary experiences of Indigenous peoples in relation to gender and sexual expression, straight off the website. So, this is now becoming an academic field as well. So what does academia, which is rooted in a Eurocentric ontology and epistemology by its generation of knowledge, bringing to this conversation for you personally and in the general scheme of things? And particularly because you're teaching in it, Billy Ray, actually. Yeah.
I suppose my thoughts are headed toward, there's this like a specific conundrum that faces an Indigenous person who is in higher education, because it's been several years now that education has been positioned as something that might save us because of how long it was, withheld from us. And, Indigenous peoples didn't really have access to higher education until really relatively recently in history. But then, so when you go to a university, you're often met with all of the, structural barriers that an institution like a university has. And so it feels both like a place, again, another, contradiction. It feels like a place of immense possibility and immense constraint. And I have felt at times, for example, especially so in the UK, when I was at the University of Oxford, that, maybe...
I mean, Oxford as well, like...
Yeah, exactly. I was like, maybe Indigenous flourishing is impossible here. But then I've also felt like that, I have felt that I've been genuinely, saved by some of the things I have studied in university. And so I feel a lot of gratitude because of that. And I want to create classrooms in which that feeling can be replicated for other Indigenous students. I'm not gonna go around like singing the praises of the neoliberal university, because it is first and foremost a profit-driven institution that positions students as consumers. But I do think that individual instructors, I've experienced this, especially like in feminist classrooms, individual instructors can cultivate an atmosphere of, genuine interest in the world and in the possibility of another world. And so that's where I think the value of academia sits for me.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, thank you. So I've just started a minor chorus, so I feel like this is gonna, that was where it feels like it's going, in some, no spoilers, but I'm excited. And Joshua, what about you and university, the academic world?
I mean, I think I would similarly agree. I think for me, at the University of Calgary in Mohkinstsis Treaty 7, I'm housed in two departments, English and International Indigenous Studies. And so there's two little veins that I kind of follow. My usual breakdown of courses is 2 and 2, so I would teach 2 in the winter, 2 in the fall. And between those two, 1 in English, 1 in Indigenous Studies. And I'm very energized and inspired by and hopeful and made hopeful by my students on the Indigenous side. So I teach in this program called ISAP, which is an acronym for the Indigenous Students Access Program, which is basically, quote unquote, an upgrade program for anyone who wants to come, but it's primarily for Treaty 7, a little bit from Treaty 8, and anyone who's in the vicinity to come to this program to upgrade, again, to enter into university. And so these are students who finished school on the res or didn't finish school because that education is just not up to par on the public education system as the university wants to recognize a grade 12 versus a reservation grade 12. And so my class is all Indigenous. Every single student is. My TAs are Indigenous. I work with the Indigenous Studies Office. And that's
have you as an Indigenous teacher, which is...
And then there's me. Yeah. I'm there too, which is a different kind of classroom than when I teach in English, right? Because in this classroom, we can bypass, the Indigenous 101. I don't need to teach what a residential school is. I don't need to teach what the 60 scoop is. These children and these students know the evolution and the machination of imperial tools of settler colonization. For example, how residential schools evolves into CFS, right? These students know about incarceration. So we don't have to go through a whole lot of the historical trauma that's often read as cultural reality or cultural truth, which is a segment of, but it is not the whole, right? And we can just move into conversations of the now and what we foresee of coming from the future. And I love a classroom like that, where everyone is on an equal playing field, and everyone at least has the baseline, both in embodied forms of knowing, because these students know, right? They come from these spaces, they are Indigenous, and they have they're aware of, I would say, the zeitgeist of contemporary Indigenous media writ large. Versus in an English classroom, which is great too. I teach literature and I teach creative writing. But I feel like so much of my energy and so much of my time in a 4-month class, in an 8-month class over the whole year, is just me catching students up to speed. Like why we don't say Native, or like what Indigenous means, why to capitalize Indigenous, what's a residential school, what's intergenerational trauma, who's Maria Campbell, right? And so like so much work goes in, even in, I'm teaching a graduate class right now, even in the higher levels or graduate courses, you're still catching these students up. And so much of my energy, so much of my time goes into the baseline education of these students for me to even think about having a conversation about like what's an Indigenous futurism. Right? What is Indigiqueer literature? Where does it come from, right? What do we do next? And so, yeah, I find that academia for me is generative. It does house me. It keeps the lights on as a writer. And I would say, likewise with Billy, it has like saved me at times, specifically of who it's introduced me to in terms of writers, theorists, and people. But I just wish that I would have the opportunity to not expend so much energy on unnecessary things and actually do what I came there to do.
In your ideal world, how would those students be prepared? Is it like, okay, you've got to go and do a primer course, or you've got to know what these things are before you come to this class? Like, what would that look like, do you think?
I mean, I can speak poorly of Alberta and our Conservative Party right now with Danielle Smith and the major cuts to education that she has done. But in an ideal world like this, the mandates of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission would have been met, and these would be mandatory parts of public education, at least what a residential school is, right? And as well that, faculty on the university side could also take courses. Like you could teach the entry level 200, like you can teach. Like for example, the University of Winnipeg has a mandatory 3-credit hour to graduate in any program to take an Indigenous studies course. It's often on the labor of Indigenous professors, and I think our allied or our colleagues can also be incorporating these in, so that you can be the ally work teaching the basics. So I'm not sitting here lamenting and trauma spilling more.
I'm doing it year after year.
And continually, exactly. So that's what I would say in the ideal world.
Noted, recorded. Shayne, I'm curious from the French language side in Quebec, do you interact with the universities here where for Indigenous studies en français ici, like, and I'm ignorant of that. I'm not in the academic system here, but do we have anything comparable that you can think of?
I would say there's a lot more going on in the French side here in Quebec. I know that we have like a French research, Indigenous research at the Université Laval. But when I first started university, there was like, for me, there was no references, nothing on, like even in New Brunswick when I was there for the first 2 years to study, there wasn't anything for me to just maybe like inspire me to just go do more, like if I want to go in the master's eventually or something in research. But when I was at Université Laval for theater, once I finished my bachelor's, I was like, I can do maybe like a master's, like doing like advanced theater with an Indigenous perspective. But I was like not ready because I still feel like there's the colonized way of, that's how education is, and I feel like there's the way that we have our teachings, it's different when you get to understand more how it works. And this is why I feel like, but I know there's a lot of research going on already. I know for example, Féfé Sauvage is being studied for a lot of realities and stuff like that, so that's really good to know. But I know it's really hard maybe on the French side as Indigenous to study more, like a master's or doing more like a thesis and the doctors. But I'm inspired to do it anyway, like eventually. I feel like I wasn't ready back then. I guess it's been like 10 years since then. So I feel like now that I've been back in New Brunswick, I work at the University of Moncton, and it's really francophone there. And I still love to teach, or just the education part, like the traditional aspect of it. And I really want to do that on that route eventually. So it's still open.
Keep an eye out with it. I'm going to switch slightly. Sorry, I'm keeping an eye on time. I could go on with this. I wanted to ask about this idea of future, in a way, because, as we said, you cited some of the older Indigiqueer writers who have they been reclaimed now as Indigiqueer writers, or does it tend to be the people who've written, in the last 20 years who get called of that? What's that continuity? And also in coexistence, it feels like there's a movement to being of the older generation, like it's nearly becoming, the Indigiqueer, not quite elders, but there's definitely the sense of a younger generation underneath a lot of the narrators. Which again, is it moving? How quickly is that generational shift moving, do you think, between the writers who came before and the generation who are now reading your work and going on to do something? What do you see in terms of classrooms and younger Indigiqueer writers? Are you seeing other voices coming up, or are you mentoring people already? Is that, yeah.
I do a lot of mentorship. I work with, right now, or collaborate with Indigenous Writers Circle with Audible. So each year we have, I think, like 6 or 7 mentors, and each of us take 2 mentees on, which is just lovely. So for example, last year, I got to work with Jen Sexsmith, who is a Mohawk writer. Her book, In the Hands of Men, was published, and also just read as an Audible book by Kwahiatonhk Devi Jacobs, who you may know from Reservation Dogs. So I would highly suggest checking that out. I'm so proud of them. And yeah, my students as well. And I'm very invested right now, again, in Indigenous futurisms. And, people see that as speculative or in a form of genre. I just don't see those boundaries and borders of genre and form right now anymore. But I come from a tradition too, like we do. Like Gregory Schofield was named, Christos, Beth Brand, we got Thompson Highway at the same time, Daniel Heath Justice, right? I don't know if we're retroactively claiming. I think they've always been queer Indigenous or Two-Spirit or trans Indigenous writers. And I think that's just I try to echo back as much as I can. But for me, what the futurisms of Indigenous literatures looks like, I think, is some of us maybe are wrestling with, what do we call this generation of writers? Is it a third wave? What is this? Jeremy Dutcher called it Indigenous Renaissance. I don't know the terminology. I don't particularly care for it right now to be a part of naming it. But what I do see is a difference of who's on stage here and who's writing with us and who we're mentoring is just a shift in tone, a shift in craft and style, a multimodality of forms, like autofiction, I think, is just at the paramount on the forefront of Indigenous writing, but Canadian literature that's written by BIPOC authors too, I would say. Autofiction kind of takes the front stage. And what I'm noticing, at least what I'm trying to work towards, I can speak for myself, is just a shifting away from either residential school narratives, which were so popular in the forms of autobiography, biography, memoir, or even literatures that were not about it, but were dealing with the aftermath. So even specters of residential schools, we're always in these literatures, versus right now, for me, in my writing and my research, I'm just really interested in moving past that.
Yeah.
That work has been done. It's important. Beautiful, amazing writers have written about that. But I'm more interested in writing about the otherwise, or the wherefore to, or whereupon, right? Just beyond the kind of the Sauron-like optics of that, because that interests me more, right?
Billy Ray, anything for you in terms of what's gone before and where it's going to?
Yeah, I think we're still in a moment where what will emerge isn't fully visible yet. I think I'm interested to see in a few years, 4, 5, 6, whatever, what a new cadre of queer Indigenous writers is thinking about, how they're writing. I feel with us, it's been our work from the beginning really has been about form and style as much as it has been about content. we wanted to work on those things simultaneously. And maybe that's part of our like aesthetic particularity, our generation. But then I think that in the future, people will be like, you know, Josh and Billy Ray were thinking about these things, and that's sort of outdated now.
Next year, we'll have other writers referencing you. Oh, yes, it's so long ago. What I was really, I was reading Making Love with the Land and then Coexistence, and there's a passage in The Pain Eater and then a passage in my diary, and both the narrators return. So in The Pain Eater, the narrator returns to the Rocky Mountains, and in my diary, the narrator turns to the prairies. Forgive me for not using the Indigenous place names there. And I have the extracts here. And would you read them? Is that weird if I ask you to read? Just because I wanted you to respond to them because it's about land, and you talk about homeland as well. And I thought there was such an interesting echo. But can I ask you to read those? Because it'd just be nice to hear them in your voice. So there's Joshua's bit, and there's Billy Ray's bit. That's okay.
So this is from a short story called My Diary, which is about an older queer Cree artist who moves from Toronto to Northern Alberta. Whenever I write homeland, I see the ghostly possibility of the non-word homoland. I wish my homeland was queerer. That would have solved the problems I had growing up. There was so much to contend with and no schema to reduce the scale of contention to something manageable. I'm back now to imbue the landscape with whatever queer currents I can muster. Is it possible to be a singular person and alter the current of a whole landscape, make it queerer?
This reminds me when I was at your book launch in Winnipeg, and you were reading from Coexistence, and there's a story about a professor who's queer, like lamenting a breakup, and a bunch of books. And I don't know if you've seen Euphoria, but I was like, is this play about us? That's what this reminds me of again. Okay, so yeah, this is from The Pain Eater in Making Love with the Land. I continually find myself making plans with kin for when this is over, the pandemic, the lockdown. Well, hopefully this repeated deferral reminds me of how embroiled we are within a system of continual warring. When is over? Will that day ever come? Will our collective hope bloom in revolutionary NDN joy when we emerge on the other side? Can our feet carry us across such hilltops and chasms? What is over and where is over? In Nehiawiwin, or in the Cree language, we say gisipi as a means of signaling an end or a finishing. If over were a place, I would name it homeland, signaling a finale, but also an entrance into possibility, for this world we inhabit is overwrought, overwritten.
Thank you very much for reading those. That was great to hear. And that's time. We are now finished. I'm going to say we ask, I feel as this is so rude, but this become a thing. We ask people not to slow down the authors on their way out because they're going next door to the Espace Morin to sign books. So if you want to have a chat with them, and I suspect a lot of you do, please make your way next door and you'll be able to meet them, and they'll be sitting down comfortably with possibly coffee and glasses of water and books to buy and sign if you want as well. So please, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Joshua, Billy Ray, and Shayne. Please put your hands together. It's been a real pleasure.